38, yes, of the Selenidad source. This book, and remember the excerpt we're reading is the introduction to this book. This book examines some of the ways that Selenidad provided blueprints for and often remapped the terrain of Latinidad. My understanding of Selenidad as a contested, creative, and critical set of endeavors is indebted to scholarship in recent years that has revealed how acts of cultural memory and collective mourning can generate and transform concepts of national, racial, and gendered identities. This causes me pause, and I think that you should also stop and consider musical icons who have passed, who, even though they might not be of Latino descent, have altered and transformed concepts of identities. I think of Michael Jackson, and while he was not Latino, there was this kind of dichotomous relationship he had with his African American acceptance and how he wanted to engage in colorism. Remember, that's a word that we used in, I believe it was My Mother's House, one of the hyperlinks there with colorism. I think it was in the interview, the Q&A interview. You might want to put colorism with Michael Jackson over here. Oof, that looks really ugly. And if you are a student in Miss Lantanzio's class, perhaps you could reach out to her and ask her where that article regarding colorism was referenced. But I do believe that there's much more here than just the words. This collective mourning cannot be detached from cultural memory and the manner in which it transforms concepts of these three identities. This focus on the imaginative nature of memory often foregrounds, so it's absolutely foundational, foregrounds the role of performance and popular culture in the transmission, sharing of national or cultural histories. There's a lot to be unpacked here. This imaginative nature of memory. Imaginative means kind of what we create on our own as far as memory of. In that imaginative nature, which might not be accurate completely, is foundational to performance and pop culture in sharing national and cultural histories. Understood as an act of creation as well as citation in research, memory functions much like performance, as Joseph Roach observes. You might want to look him up. I have not yet. Quote, as both quotation and invention. So quotation is going to be lifting research. Invention is going to be that imaginative nature. I'm going to start over. Understood as an act of creation as well as citation, memory functions much like performance, as Joseph Roach observes, quote, as both quotation and invention, an improvisation in the moment on borrowed themes, with claims on the future as well as the past. Claims on the future is that transmission of national or cultural history, which impacts the past. It also tethers into this identity issue up here. That is, okay, when you see a writer use the transition that is, it's going to try and nutshell the difficult concepts that were shared earlier. That is, both memory and performance goes against traditional notions of temporality, meaning it's here and then it's gone. That defies those notions by simultaneously repeating and revising cultural scripts or scenarios. So, right here, we have a nutshell argument that you might want to paraphrase, perhaps put in your own understanding, maybe draw context contextual parallel to a current event or a past current event. I use Michael Jackson. It's not too far in my past. It's definitely far in your past. Given their improvisatory and capacious meaning the capacity of, and capacious nature, sites, places of cultural memory such as public commemorations commonly act as contested arenas wherein what Marita Sturken calls narrative tangles form among competing claims to a shared past, present, or future. So when you think tangles, it's almost like it's in a knot. It's not smooth. And the narratives or the storylines that are created from cultural memory and performance. So there's a lot happening here. This book takes part in these efforts to explore the inventive powers, that's the performance and the imaginative nature, and political contours, how we shape political contours of memory and mourning by examining the entangled narratives about Latinidad, citizenship, and gendered and sexual identities that cross over Selenidad. Some critics see only obsessive, often racialized hagiography. That's a word you should look up, folks. So take a moment, pause, do so, put the definition out here. Might be something you want to springboard from for a research question, and it most likely is going to be a question that I ask you in a Google form question. Some critics see only obsessive, often racialized hagiography in Selenidad, while others bemoan it as the prime example of the commodification, so making profit off a commodity that you get money from, of Latino culture. To be sure, tracking Selenidad invariably involves following the trails of fan cultures and commodifying structures, but these forces alone cannot account for Selena's robust afterlife. To borrow a phrase from Gilbert Rodman in his work on Elvis's afterlife, I am interested in explaining Selenidad, rather than in explaining it away as simply the result of inevitable commodification or pathological Latino melancholia. Melancholia is sad that someone's passed, perhaps, and typically the OLIA, meaning objects or items. Selenidad operates in ways akin, close to, similar to what Raymond Williams refers to as a structure of feeling, or critical and effective social practice in process that supports multiple and variant constructions of Latinidad. In fact, as the following chapters illustrate, Selenidad reveals important insights about the ways that assumptions about Latino consumption and mourning practices are positioned against normative standards for civic and national citizenship. So this last sentence is really pivotal in understanding what came before. Selenidad, which is a trend, a feeling, a cultural movement. Selenidad reveals important insights, epiphanies, ideas about the ways that assumptions about Latino consumption, why there's this consumptive nature in the Latino culture because of these deaths, are positioned against normative, the status quo's standards for civic and national citizenship. It is not uncommon for a singular figure, event, or image to emerge as a flashpoint for the constellation and transformation of cultural or national memory. Think, for instance, of Stonewall, Jet Magazine's photographs of Emmett Till. Stop, stop, stop. Google quickly, add some context in the margins. Elvis or the planes careening into the Twin Towers. So these are all three flashpoints that these authors are using to justify the argument in this paragraph. These memories, these memory circuits are charged by and in turn animate a range of collective memories. I remember where I was when the Twin Towers careened into, when the planes careened into the Twin Towers. I was teaching 7th grade English. I was at Lincoln Junior High. My husband was teaching science there. And he came and knocked on my door and told me. and it was absolutely surreal. I didn't even have the emotions to process because it was just so inconceivable that that would happen. And so it took several weeks just to process what those emotions would be like. Memory circuits provide complex pathways through which currents of past history often run alongside or intersect with currents that pulse with claims to the present and hopes for the future. There's a lot here. Memory circuits, what we recall, provide complex pathways through which currents of past histories often run alongside or intersect with currents that pulse with claims to the present. So we tend to process the past based on our present, I believe is what the authors are saying here. Selenidad acts as one such memory circuit. Thank you for that very short sentence. It really helps. Dead, I'd circle that, bodies of famous figures often operate as such circuits. The tethering point to the fact that they've all passed and how they contribute to our use of those deaths to make sense of history and present time. Dead bodies of famous figures often operate as such circuits, or what Roach calls surrogates. So you know that a surrogate in biology is one who carries another's embryo and then baby to be birthed. That's the similar figurative connection here. Roach calls surrogates for the transmission of collective memory. Here we've got collective, not just individual, or cultural continuity among communities of the living. It's a really impressive figurative connection here. The tragically fallen, once beautiful, dead female body has its own particular cultural function. As Elizabeth Bronfen notes, quote, "The death of a beautiful woman emerges as the requirement for a preservation of existing cultural norms and values." Wow. That almost a beautiful woman has to die for these norms to be preserved. Eesh. Throughout the 1990s, dead Latinas, Selena in particular, were frequently pressed into service by a range of communities in efforts to claim or to contest the political, cultural, or economic force of Latinidad. What made Selena more readily activated and frequently deployed than other dead Latinas? I do believe that this needs to be captured, folks. This is so poignant. You might want to look up what poignant means. So this question, let's hope that the authors then answer. Ironically, the aspects of Selena that distinguish her from figures such as Frida and Davida are the very ones that seem to make her an unlikely candidate for such widespread iconization. Unlike Frida, artist with paint, and Evita, Selena was a U.S.-born Latina who grew up speaking English in a family that had lived in Texas for several generations. Although advertising execs and political parties rarely acknowledge this distinction, in their homogenizing formulations of Latinidad, U.S. entertainment industries before Selena historically ignored U.S.-born Latinas in favor of the exotic appeal of foreign-born Latin stars and the manufacturing of such cultural icons as Dolores Del Rio and Carmen Miranda. Interesting. So specifically, the U.S. entertainment industries ignored U.S.-born. Selena was also affiliated with an explicitly Latino working class style. So we have two distinctions here. You have the first distinction is she's not internationally born and raised, and then you have her style. She wasn't deployed to sell Bobos or Dior suits. She shared Evita's humble roots, but unlike the Argentine First Lady, she continued to promote a working class aesthetic and allegiance. After achieving fame through her fashion and her decision to continue living in the neighborhood where she was raised. This working class aesthetic was undeniably linked to the contours and complexion of Selena's own body. She was brown, unquestionably curvy, and had black hair that hadn't been lightened. Makes me think of colorism again. No securely held blonde chignon or understated accessories were fastened to tone down her color. Woo! So much here, folks. Although Frida shared Selena's dark-haired and brown-skinned features, Frida's style was more frequently equated with an exotic artistic sensibility and with the romanticized notions of revolutionary Mexico than with contemporary U.S. Latino culture. Just FYI, we need to stop for a moment for an EOCA quick exploration. This sentence that we just read, I hope you would note, is a small concession. Moving on. Selena's age also set her apart from the others. Okay, so we've got third distinction. All three women faced untimely deaths, but Selena was particularly a young woman who was clearly at the beginning of her career when she died at age 23. Her status as a figure who had just begun to cross into the limelight thus resonated powerfully for Latina and Latino communities yearning to express a collective promise for their own future. Selena lived, died, and was quickly canonized. Might be a word you don't know. If so, you should look it up. During the 90s, unlike the others who were unearthed and rediscovered years after their deaths. Well, all the discrepancies happening here. She was a product of and ultimately helped shape the decade. And while one could argue that all three women performed distinctive public personas, Selena was the only one who was a performer by profession. Yep, you should have number 5, folks. Moreover, and maybe number 6, Selena gained popularity in a musical performance form, Tejano music, that was often ignored, or at best derided, looked down upon, by mainstream and even many Latino communities. And number 6. And yet, despite the fact that all these distinguishing traits, dark, working class, Tejano music singer, are frequently devalued and even reviled in many communities across the nation. So notice the growing connotations. We start with devalued, then we move to reviled. Selena emerged as a widely revered icon among diverse constituencies with a range of sometimes conflicting agendas. Motivations. It is precisely this conundrum, I love this word, how and why this unlikely young pop star became a seemingly ubiquitous cultural icon, that interests me. Okay, me. Oh, that's right. We had an I earlier and a me earlier, so we've got this solo author here. In the following pages, I explore how Selenidad animated a range of charged, interconnected circuits from political attempts to manage the emerging population categorized as Latinos to corporate manufacturing of Latinos as a marketing demographic, from the makings of U.S. Latina and Latino cultural memory to the inter and inter meaning between groups and within groups. Latina and Latino conflicts and coalitions that arise along lines of gender, sexuality, race, and religion. I would argue, folks, that there is much that could be explored here within a research question. Not just with Selena, not just with the Latino or Latina background. It's an ideology that this author is discussing. The performative context from which Selena emerged and ultimately took part in reimagining is the dynamic tradition of Tejano music, which, unlike most of the Latino musical styles popularized in the recent Latin music boom, originated within the borders of the United States. As the ethnomusicologist Manuel Peña notes in his History of Tejano Music, Texas Mexicans have distinguished themselves from other Mexican American communities of the Southwest by their strongly innovative musical spirit. Tejanos were the principal innovators in a range of musical styles, including the border ballads, working class dance hall music, orchestral ensembles patterned after American swing bands. So you have this blending of Mexican music and the American performance traditions. It's this beautiful blending. Historically, Tejano music has been derided by Mexicans as too Americanized, by Anglo-Americans and other Latino communities as too Mexican, and by nearly all as rural, working class music. I never thought of music being working class, although I do think of opera being perhaps white collar, affluent class. So Perhaps there's something there. In truth, Tejano music exemplifies the best of border cultural production by providing a historically resilient and innovative space wherein Tejanos have refashioned an identity that transcends the bipolar categorizations of Mexican or American. Within the themes and rhythms of Tejano music, one can trace the legacy of occupations and negotiations over power that have marked South Texas. So you could make a connection to how maybe other musical trends have done this. It might springboard into a research question. Mexican rancheras and Latin American cumbias collide with German polkas and mainstream US country pop and hip hop, often all within the same song. So here's evidence, perhaps common knowledge, doesn't need to be cited. Although you and I wouldn't know it, maybe the reader of this piece would. Not the readers of this piece might know this. It's another layer of evidence to say that it's not just uniquely categorized in Tejano music, which is why I starred this up here. Tejano music thus reveals the deeply creative ways that Texas Americans have adapted to and often challenged the pressures that bore upon them as the result of a history of economic and political disenfranchisement. You need to know this word, folks. If you don't know the word, pause, stop, look it up, come back and add it. Very important here because we hear this feeling resonated throughout the passage, throughout the source. Selena mastered traditional Tejano musical conventions with a repertoire that included Spanish language mariachi ballads, English language pop love songs, and code switching cumbias. Please forgive me on those interpretations. Like other young musicians throughout the 1980s, Selena, who grew up in the working class neighborhood of Molina in Corpus Christi, transformed Tejano music largely as a result of her urban upbringing and her exposure to rock and roll, African American funk, Caribbean reggae, Colombia, and Anglo-American pop music. But remember, folks, I've told you to always be aware of the big buts, especially when they start an independent clause. But unlike other young Tejano musicians of her generation, Selena reinvented the male-dominated genre. Oh, get it, girl. During her early years of touring as a teenager, Selena quickly gained a reputation for the combination of her deep, resonant voice, adroit dance moves, I want to look that word up, charismatic stage presence, and sexually suggestive self-designed costumes. Her stage persona was unusual for artists in the history of Tejano music. The dominance of male performers and record label owners and the common recurrence of misogynist themes found in the lyrics of Tejano music contributed to the dearth meaning lack, or at best devaluation of female participation. Selena's profound economic success, bold costumes, deft choreography, and powerful vocal skills. I do hope that before you ever started reading this source, you watched the 2 videos that I posted in week 25. You've got to listen to her, folks. Marked a significant intervention with the masculinist space of Tejano music. That is, okay, thank you so much, author, for these transitions. And then the nutshell sentence that follows, that is, she represented and ultimately redefined Texas-Mexico border culture, while simultaneously succeeding in crossing over a range of aesthetic, cultural, and national borders. I was hoping to see gender in here. I really do believe it should be in here, based on the details prior. Selena also displayed wide-ranging talents and actively participated in the creation of her image in her second career as a clothing designer. It was well known among her fans that she performed in outfits of her own design, characterized by their sexual suggestiveness. She would often combine low-cut, sequin-studded bustiers with midriff-bearing, tight-fitting, flared-cut pants. Can you imagine, in 2024, what the viewers of Selena in 1990 would say perhaps about, I don't know, maybe Beyonce? These costumes led many mainstream chroniclers to author's note, label her the Tex-Mex Madonna. When in fact, the author's perspective here, Selena's style was more reflective of the decidedly working class Tejana self-fashioning than an uninspired attempt to copy Madonna's style. After years of designing costumes for herself and her band, Selena launched her own clothing line in 1993 and opened a small chain of boutiques, Selena, etc., in 1994. This act served to bolster her status as a working woman, and more particularly as a young Latina actively striving to assert symbolic and material independence. from the patriarchal confines of her family and larger cultural forces as well. Her entrepreneurial efforts in the realm of self-fashioning also clearly set the prototype for the star as brand phenomenon that has emerged with artists such as Beyonce and Jennifer Lopez. In addition to her status as a sexy young woman, Selena was regarded as a barrio girl next door. So you've got these dual roles she's serving long before Jennifer Lopez's incarnation as Jenny from the Block. She was often referred to as the queen of the people or the best girl of the barrio, due in large part to the fact that even after achieving fame and fortune, she continued to live next door to her parents' home in Molina with her husband, the guitarist Chris Perez, whom she married in 92. Her working class persona did not result simply from the fact that she continued to reside near her family in the barrio, but from her savvy self-fashioning. In interviews, she often discussed, I wonder whose perspective this is. Do you ever read something and go, I wonder whose perspective here? It's got to be the author's, right? In interviews, because there is no follow-up research justifying this, in interviews, she often discussed her love, okay, here we go, of fast food or her shopping excursions to Payless Shoes. Okay, folks, I don't know if you even have a context for Payless Shoes. I don't even know if we still have the Payless Shoes in the Pinnacle Mall. A discount franchise frequented by and often located within working class communities. She thereby gained a reputation as a genuine, wholesome barrio girl, quote, who never lost touch with her roots. Selena resonated with audience not only in terms of a shared class and regional history, but in terms of color. Her brown skin and unbleached black hair provided a rare and affirming representation of frequently devalued morena, dark traits in a world where most Latina American celebrities conformed to Anglo-American standards of beauty and hair and color and body shape. Put a star. Selena's promotion in self-fashion is the Tejana in touch with her roots and the well-worn good girl tempting siren. Siren here is an allusion to the sirens in mythology. Most of you might have a connection with Odysseus having to pass by the sirens to get back to Penelope, his wife, after the Trojan War, and how he stuffed his ears with beeswax and tethered himself to the poles or of the staff of his ship. You might want to look that up. You might just want to jot off to the side what the allusion is. And the well-worn good girl tempting siren dialectic that circumscribed her career invariably highlight the demands of authenticity placed on minoritarian communities. Whew. Through her constant efforts at self-fashioning, she navigated both the roots and the routes. Oh, that's just beautiful writing, folks. Good daughter, dangerous woman, through which her story was regularly channeled. Oh, I really like the syntax of this piece. In some ways, as a working-class musical performer from somewhere down south who exuded a sexual charisma on stage and set up home close to her roots, Selena resembles that other dead American icon, Elvis Presley. So true. Both performers continue to enjoy a vibrant afterlife, underscoring the ways that performers act as repositories of cultural fantasies and mediums through which collective histories, anxieties, and aspirations are expressed and refashioned. Frequent comparisons to Elvis proliferated following Selena's death, with one critic summarily reducing her, reducing, that's not a positive connotation, her to a new, darker complected Elvis. While this dismissive is another heavy tone word, quip ignores the historical and gendered specificities of Selenidad, it does provoke questions about the racializing work that Selena does. What does it mean to be a new, darker complected Elvis? What do Selena's performances and the memorial performances in her honor reveal about racial standings in the U.S. that Elvis's performance and his ensuing iconization in particular sought to conceal? Notice they're both in italics, and they are juxtaposing verbs. You might want to make note of your takeaways. Because Selena died before she dyed her hair in the dark roots of U.S. popular culture show through, let me reread that. Because Selena died before she dyed her hair in the dark roots of U.S. popular culture show through in Selena commemoration in ways that are often strategically effaced in most Elvis worship. Selena and her subsequent phenomenon opened up a space for the representation of working class brown women and made visible traditionally ignored Latina and Latino histories in the ongoing Latin and Latino presence within U.S. cultural, political, and economic spheres. Selenidad thus illuminates and at times actually inaugurated kind of a starting point for greatness, the connections between cultural memory and the shifting categories of racial and gendered identifications at the dawn of the 21st century. Thank you for listening, folks. I hope it's been helpful.